Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight back with the Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society. As you're saying, it's been a few
Oh,
years for me, and I'm
okay.
especially pleasure to be here with Mike Kilfoil, my friend, and partner on this project. We're here to talk about Parks Canada's new flagship exhibit at the Halifax Citadel. After 5 years of working on this thing, 5 years of our lives, grueling years, I would say, we're now very happy to show it off and talk about it. The new exhibit is called Fortress Halifax, a city shaped by conflict. When you enter the new exhibit, as you can see here on the screen, first thing you see are beautiful paintings of Mi'kmaq artist like Paul. Perhaps not what you'd expect, deep inside the stone walls of this British colonial and military fortress. Through five large murals in the first gallery, you're immersed in the landscape of Jabuktuk, the Mi'kmaq term for Halifax, meaning the Great Harbor. And you receive a geographical tour around key Mi'kmaq cultural sites in the harbor in the year 1749. The British arrived that year. This story is told and seen from an Indigenous perspective. We'll come back to that theme in a little bit. First, a little context. 40 years. 40 years is a long time in history. There have been major events and movements, of course, in Nova Scotia and around the world, but I'm thinking more about history itself, how the discipline of history has changed, how the things we now study have changed, and how inclusiveness and shared authority are now hallmarks in public history projects like the one we're sharing with you tonight. So, why 40 years? Well, several years back, when we decommissioned the old flagship exhibit called The Tides of History to make space for the new one, it was actually that old, dating to the late 1970s. Suffice to say, then, it was time for a change, interpretive renewal, if you will, both in terms of design and presentation, but also the diversity of the content we're offering. The Tides, as you can see here on your screen, was a theater style historical experience. Over 4 screens and running about 45 minutes, it provided the audience with a strong, but I would say fairly traditional narrative on the history of the Citadel and other forts, imperial rivalry and protecting the Halifax Naval Station and dockyard, and key moments in Canadian history. It was much loved in its day. We still get many visitors that come to the new exhibit and talk about how they enjoyed the tides as kids, or if they're a little older, some professors too, talking about how they brought their own kids to the tide space. So, in that sense, the title of our talk tonight, The Tides of History, is a bit of a metaphor, a recognition or nostalgia, if you will, for the history of heritage presentation at the site, but also a reminder that history can and must change with the times, the tides of history, if you will. Many of you have likely visited the Citadel in person. I hope so. It's just up the hill. Completed in the 1850s, it was the fourth and final Halifax Citadel. It was originally designated as a National Historic Site in 1935, and then, following the Second World War, it and several other old forts were transferred from D&D to what is now Parks Canada. Collectively, we at Parks call them the Halifax Defence Complex, and they play a vital role in preserving Halifax's and Nova Scotia's military heritage. The Citadel is also a high-profile site. With upwards of 200,000 visitors per year, it is one of the largest and most visited historic sites in the country. It's also an urban site, towering over downtown Halifax, the largest city in Canada. In other words, the stories we tell at this place reach many people every year. All to say, when significant funding became available around 2015, we jumped at the chance to renew this exhibit. We saw it as an opportunity to modernize the visitor experience presented at the site, but also to tell a more complex and compelling story. Excuse me.
Hi, I'm Mike Kilfoil. As Keith mentioned, I was the project manager on this exhibit, so my talk is going to be more mm, nuts and bolts. So the exhibit itself is broken down into it. We decided to, first of all, go with the chronological history of Halifax, or story of Halifax, and this was framework was greatly um, improved by the fact that we wanted to tell the story of the four citadels that stood atop Citadel Hill. The current citadel is the fourth. And by doing so, it would actually help us be able to tell the story because each citadel was built at a time of crisis in the British Empire, which is a time of monumental change for here in Halifax. So each story, for instance, we talk about the establishment of Halifax. The first citadel speaks to the 7 Years' War. The second citadel speaks to the American Revolution, War of 1812, Victorian England or Victorian Halifax and American or the threat of American expansion. We're able to use that framework to create the theme for our exhibit. Now, that was great that we had a theme, and it was lovely that we had an idea of what we wanted to do because this is what we started with. With the decommissioning of the tides of history, we were given a dank, dark, dirty cavern inside the walls of the Halifax Citadel, 6,500 square feet, and we had to figure out what we were going to do. So we even had a water feature there. Inadvertently, we had a water cascading down the side of the wall. And some clever engineering came up with a solution for that. Turns out the gravel underneath the slab is a love French drain. So we cut a slot in the slab, water drain. It'll run behind the walls, but we mitigate it. That gives you an idea of what we were up against. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Keith.
As Mike hinted there, this was a big exhibit project by Parks Canada standards. We also had the luxury of a really big space, which came in handy. Through 7 galleries, as you could see there on the screen, it takes this exhibit, the new exhibit, takes a broad social approach to exploring Halifax's history, its defenses, its diverse peoples and multiple perspectives, and how conflict has shaped the city over 250 plus years, basically from the mid 18th century to the World Wars and beyond. Its real focus is on people, ordinary women and men, and it doesn't shy away from difficult history, quite the opposite. It uses what I like to call a war and society lens to walk visitors through 3 centuries of history. This broad lens includes forts and battles and regiments, as you would expect at a place like the Halifax Citadel, but also many social and cultural themes related to conflict and how it's impacted the city over time. Stories of refugees, deportation, immigration, treaties of different kinds, architecture, economics, leisure, and so on. For the audience, we have deployed a range of tools and strategies to bring these colorful accounts and people to life, aimed at different visitors, from text and artifacts to striking imagery, maps, films, and original artworks, tactile interactives, and a host of cool technology. And we'll get into more of this later. This inclusive social approach reflects Parks Canada's new framework on history and commemoration, which was published in 2019. That document is big on increasing the diversity of the stories Parks Canada tells at its sites, so national parks, national historic sites, sharing authority, sharing the pen, too, not the easiest thing to do if you're a writer, confronting difficult histories and colonial legacies, and highlighting Indigenous heritage. Now, I've joked with some Parks Canada colleagues over the years, over the course of this project, that at the beginning of this process, we felt like guinea pigs. We started way back in 2015, 2016, even before Mike came on board. At that time, we didn't have the framework to draw upon, those big guiding principles, nor did we have many recent examples of exhibit renewal handy. Certainly not at a place as complicated as the Halifax Citadel. But by the end, we kind of felt like a prototype for having achieved something in the spirit of the framework that other Parks Canada sites doing history projects could study. Many public history institutions, from museums to national historic sites to archives and many, many others, are grappling with these same kinds of issues, exhibit renewal. We've talked to dozens of them over the course of the past few years who've come to see the exhibit and kind of pick our brain on process. If they can learn from our journey and our mistakes, that can only be a good thing.
So I joined the project in 2017. It was already underway for 18 months. So when I arrived, we had some issues. So essentially, the project was stalled and it was at an impasse. Parks Canada wasn't talking to the contractors. No one was talking to the community or to stakeholders. And it was Parks Canada was trying to run it off the corner of desks. There was no dedicated manager on it. And the project was too big for that. And it was too many moving parts. And with the breakdown in communication, nothing was happening. And then I showed up. So when I first started looking at honestly, the first 8 months of my job was rebuilding trust and rebuilding lanes of communication. It wasn't just Parks Canada and the contractors. Other government departments, the project was being managed through Public Works or PSPC, so that added another layer of bureaucracy and another layer of challenge to the entire project. And as we were going, I've been told since that the project, when I came on board, the project was red flagged at the highest levels and was likely to be canceled if they didn't have real progress in that fiscal year. So we started looking at what we had in front of us. And what we had was the contractor's first draft of the layout and the first draft of the content. And they were both, with a candy coating, they were terrible. It was bad history, poorly written. The images were all from Wikipedia. And the layout made no sense whatsoever from a chronological or historical flow. There didn't seem to be a theme. So to make a long story short, some drastic measures had to be taken. And this is going to tell you some of the measures we took.
I like the picture. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that mess and some of those mistakes I was referencing a little earlier, in particular with our relationship with the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. So let me get back to those mistakes that I was referencing. So it would be easy for us to stand up here and show off the shining final product of the exhibit. We're happy to do so, and we're going to do so in a little bit. Um, but the making of this exhibit, kind of backstory, the warts and all kind of story, is even more compelling. And so that's the story we're trying to tell tonight. Broadening the historical narrative and collaborating with partners and stakeholders and Indigenous rights holders was vital in planning this project from the very beginning. But actually doing those things, really doing it, moving beyond tokenism and symbols, sharing authority, was hard. And we really struggled for a good year or two, as Mike referenced. For me, this struggle is illustrated by one of our colleagues at the Mi'kmaq de Burke Cultural Center and his comments to us early in the project in one of our meetings. The MDCC was our main Indigenous partner on this project over a period of years. So the colleague told us candidly that he was very familiar with Citadel Hill. He walked by it all the time as a younger man, probably going to college, but he never went in. He felt that he wasn't welcome there, that his people and their story didn't have a place there. So hopefully this project and the journey together has gone some way to making the site a more welcoming place for him and many others. I mentioned Tim Bernard Greasy, my Mi'kmaq counterpart on the project, while getting ready for us to co-present on this exhibit at a conference together, that the first time I heard his voice, Tim's voice, on a conference call, no less, remember those, way back in 2016, He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Why are you only contacting us now?" End quote. You're late, in other words. You should have reached out early, the RFP stage, the request for proposal stage, or when the project was first discussed or funded. So we were all sitting in a boardroom up at the Citadel, and we all looked around at each other dumbfounded because we thought we had engaged early. So we were wrong, and this was one of several big missteps and lessons learned that we're going to talk about that we learned on this project. We also didn't know each other. We didn't know the people on the other end of that phone call, and there was no existing relationship at that time between the Citadel and Nipna. That mattered a lot. Building trust, building rapport, developing good relationships, they all take time. They take years. It doesn't happen overnight. That spring, back in 2016, we had our first workshop with Mi'kmaq elders at the Citadel, and they provided us, MDCC's team, our little exhibit team, and our exhibit team, with some guiding principles as we embarked on this journey together. First, that it had to be the Mi'kmaq themselves telling Mi'kmaq stories, and that was paramount. Second, that we needed to emphasize the permanence of the Mi'kmaq presence from time immemorial in this place, in Jabuktuk, not everywhere else, in this place. Third, that there needed to be a Mi'kmaq gallery or some kind of immersive space. They didn't tell us exactly what to do. Educate visitors as they first enter, before you see the British or all the other settlers. And fourth, that we needed to keep the Mi'kmaq narrative, that thread, that backbone, throughout the entire exhibit. So even if the content is strongest at the very beginning, and it is, try to keep that thread and all the different elements throughout the entire exhibit. Now, despite that sound advice from the elders, and despite having a talented exhibit team in our partner, an experienced partner, we struggled. Internally, we were handicapped by our own design build project contracting model, perhaps good for building kiosks,
Not even.
or washrooms and campground, maybe. Not so good for a major interpretive exhibit with a lot of complexity and subtlety. We were basically told by our own consultants and our contracting agent that the design was largely final and that little substantive change was possible. Now, this was only a couple of months in before we even came to grips with the project that lay ahead. We've been assembled a team. Our partners were relayed a message from us, from me, which was disrespectful. We were basically saying that we wanted them to be our partner, that we valued their partnership in doing something special and different here at the Citadel, that we really needed their help to work together, but there's little to actually work on because the design is so close to final. Maybe we can tweak over there, perhaps wordsmith over here. That's about it. Our hands were tied. We apologize. And I can still see it's in the original designs, that token wigwam in the corner in the first space. It didn't go over very well. The Mi'kmaq were not happy, and this project, and more importantly, the partnership came very close to going off the rails, hence Mike's train wreck picture. I am happy to say, however, that it didn't go off the rails completely. I don't think I would be here talking to you tonight if it did. That we stuck it out. We told some hard truths on both sides, and we came up together with a plan for a redesign, basically from scratch. In other words, we had to take a couple of steps back in order to walk forward together. That meant delays and cost overruns a lot and long days in boardrooms, but so be it. It was that important. It was the right thing to do. Centerpiece of this redesign, we need to get right to kind of get back on the trucks to communality. I think what makes this exhibit truly special, if you haven't been there, is the artwork I showed you at the beginning, and we're going to talk about now by Leonard Paul, immersing visitors in the indigenous landscape of Jabuktuk in 1749.
So we, as Keith mentioned, had some very challenging conversations while we were working on the content on this exhibit. working with MDCC, we called them CMM back then, Confederacy Man and Mi'kmaq. There were a bunch of challenges, not least of which that we were federal government, which means we were not to be trusted. And star building was a crucial part of this process. So we were able to, after several rounds of negotiation with the contractors and with PSPC, essentially tear up the design and start over for the front of the exhibit, and which subsequently led through revisions throughout the entire exhibit. And we had a blue sky moment where we could actually sit down and say, well, what do we want? How do we want to tell these stories? How do we want to present this? And CMM or MDCC had urged us to commission Leonard Paul, Mi'kmaq artist. If you're not familiar with his work, he's a classically trained painter who's had his work shown all over the world, including UN headquarters in New York City. And he's just a pleasure to work with. So it was, well, he created 7 unique works for the exhibit, and each one required pretty intense design meetings. But it was the intensity and the emotions that we had during those design meetings, I think, that helped build a stronger working relationship, helped us build the level of trust we needed to succeed on this project. Those design meetings, well, first of all, I'll talk about the importance of the art that he created. This is also when Truth and Reconciliation report was coming down, and our mandate had changed. So we're now looking at, the calls to action, particularly Indigenous stories and Indigenous voices. Leonard gave us an opportunity to present imagery for well-known historical facts. We knew, well, a great deal about these events, but we had no visual record of it, no images. An image is worth more than 1,000 words. So Leonard was able to create this imagery, but create it from an Indigenous standpoint, from a Mi'kmaq point of view, which was breathtaking for us to see when we started seeing the final product. And the development meetings themselves, I've been a project manager and a computer animator, so I've sat in hundreds of design meetings. These ones were special though, because when it started, it would have the Parks Canada team on one side of the table, the MDCC team on the other side of the table, and Leonard would be up at the front of the room with an easel or a whiteboard. And we'd be throwing ideas back and forth. He's drawing them in real time. And maybe we want to have, add this, or what if we have like 5 elders at the council meeting, and he's drawing them in real time. We're taking photos of it, and then he'd go away and come back within a week with a pencil sketch of exactly what we were talking about. And then we would cut him loose, and he would take his good sweet time back to the final painting. That's a project management thing. But the reason I have this particular image up is because this was the last one we did. And this one, for me, defines how strong our working relationship with Indigenous partners was at the end of it. This is the wearing the hat ceremony in the Institute place. So right at where we're standing.
Right there.
Cultures Farm. And we knew we wanted to have an image of this. Aikens has so much information on this particular event that we wanted to, so we sat down and said, well, how are we going to portray it? Well, let's show it that it's during the signing. And so we talked it through, and then we went away in the park side and came up with an information and resource pack with who was there on their side, what did they look like, what would they be wearing, even things like, what would they be drinking? Well, they'd have claret because they're British. So Leonard incorporated that. And the Mi'kmaq team did the same thing for the Mi'kmaq side. And then Leonard came back with this. And we trusted each other. We were able to work together. We trusted each other's information. We didn't have to review each other's notes. And we trusted Leonard. And this one it's really something special. One thing I want to point out on this one is I didn't know this, but when they buried the hatchet, that was just part of the ceremony. That's more for the European side of it. But for the Mi'kmaq, the Sackmore, the warriors, would show up in full war paint. And for them, it's the ceremonial washing off of the war paint, which signifies the return to peace. And Leonard captured that beautifully. So That's all I really want to say about that. Thank you.
I'll just reiterate what Mike mentioned there, just about how organic the process was. We had long days in boardrooms. There were 7 pieces of art. Probably took a couple of years really to get to the finish line. But really, as I mentioned earlier, it's what makes this exhibit special. And this is, he's giving an image, as Mike mentioned, to real historical events for which we know lots. We have lots of information. We know pretty much everyone at this event, but you never had a visual, let alone a visual from Enigma perspective. And there's another one. This one here, I mentioned the first gallery as an indigenous landscape, and the art surrounds you. If you're standing in the space, it's wall size, and that's intent. You're surrounded by the landscape. The walls are curved to evoke waterways. Um, and I mentioned that the British arrived. Well, they're here in this picture. This one is taken from the side of Citadel Hill in the summer of 1749, and the British arrive. And if we blew this up, if you were close to it in the exhibit, you would see that the British, you can see redcoats in the background. You can see their ships arriving in the harbor, basically 3,000 settlers and military personnel out of the blue. And they're chopping down trees to make way for a town site, or from a Mi'kmaq perspective, destroying their landscape. And, it's seen as somewhat of an invasion. And so, we invite visitors to think about what these two gentlemen might have been talking about here on the side of Citadel Hill, looking down at the town site. And one, a younger man there, is kind of animated. You can see his fist is clenched, and then an older man, a little more deep in thought. But you're viewing that scene through the shoulders, through the lens of those two gentlemen. And the British are not in focus because this is not their story to tell in this space. And he captured and he put in the hard work, Leonard, our artist, in a creative way that our two teams couldn't hope to do with words on the wall. So we are extremely grateful. And he's a great guy.
It's really good to work with.
Um, so getting back to script. Tonight we focused and I focused a lot on our work with the Mi'kmaq in this project, and I think rightfully so. But it's a big exhibit, as Mike mentioned, and there was significant collaboration with many partners in an effort to offer multiple perspectives on a range of historical subjects. So now we're going to do a little bit of a show and tell and offer a few examples. So this one here is called One Land, Four Peoples, and it's a technology experience. Our colleague Anne-Marie Lane Jonah, Parks Canada historian, often refers to it as the Beast. And this was very much her baby, and it was a ton of work. And I know Anne-Marie is a great friend to the Society. It has now come full circle. So on your left there, you can see an early poster, a presentation she gave to the Canadian Historical Association back in 2018, kind of thinking about this. And then you see the final product on the right. It's an interactive table that allows visitors to explore the messiness and the competing claims and competing names to the region through 4 groups of people: the Mi'kmaq, the Acadians, the French, and the British. Each group has a lens or a puck, if you prefer the air hockey analogy.
No.
Tomorrow night. And you see that, and you use that lens to skim over the map, which populates or fills up as you do so. So if you put the lens over a hotspot, say one of the larger settlements or areas of interest, the visitor receives all kinds of data, pops up on that group and place, on culture, migration, trade, and so forth. If you rotate the puck lens on the spot, more windows pop up, telling a story with a final reveal at the end specific to that site and the cultural lens that you're using. So say it's a video or a moving image. Now, our Mi'kmaq partners loved using maps in this way because it counters one of their pet peeves about European maps of the 17th and 18th centuries. They love maps. But these early maps usually depict Nova Scotia's interior as an empty landscape. It was not empty, of course. It was the homeland of the Mi'kmaq people. So in this table, the lens and the map that has by far the most content is the Mi'kmaq one, revealing many place names, cultural sites, petroglyphs, and the river systems that are as their highways, trade routes. Another tourist feature, again, led by our great colleague, Anne-Marie, is this large artifact display on the theme of women and war. showing the many ways that Nova Scotian women served in the armed forces for the first time during the World Wars or supported the war effort as civilians. What's really cool and authentic about this display are the women themselves in walks of life. The very outfits displayed below, in this case, were owned and worn by the women pictured above them. So we think it's pretty cool.
We think we should get a photo of the real exhibit,
Yeah,
not
I
the
know.
design
This is
photo.
we need a better picture. Amory wouldn't be happy. And you can also just come see the exhibit.
It's quite cool.
Yet another important theme is telling the stories of African Nova Scotians. So to that end, the Jamaican Maroons, though only here for a few years in the late 1790s, made a lasting impact on the city, and they provide a direct, tangible link between the African Nova Scotian community and the Citadel. And both sides are really working hard in recent years to kind of try to highlight that connection. So among other building projects, the Maroons worked on the third version of the Halifax Citadel, which basically had the same footprint as the modern day fort. The particular corner or the bastion that they helped build was known informally in the 19th century as the Maroon Bastion. The image you can see on your right features original artwork commissioned, like Mike's hand in this, especially for the new exhibit, showing the Maroons working on that corner of the fort. If you're over that corner today, it's the same footprint, you're basically walking on that heritage. And the Maroon story was also designated recently as a national historic event by the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada, one major international ceremony last summer at the Citadel, as you can see on the left.
Thanks. So we talked about the stories that were told and how we got to them, but now I want to talk about how we told these stories. First, I do want to point out all of this was done with a very collapsed time frame because we were so far behind schedule. The installation was underway while we were actually writing stuff that was going on the walls they're putting up. That's not how you want to do it, just for the record. So for our visitor experience, we wanted to use, or we adopted the best practices for the interpretation community, and that includes understanding that people learn in different ways. Some people are readers, some people want to watch a video, some people want to hear, some people want to take a deep dive, some people want to take a very fast walk through. So we had to try and incorporate all of these different learning methods and all of these different, we call them sprinters, walkers, crawlers, but and incorporate all these different interests. So we included things like the traditional interpretive panels you see in just about every museum, a lot of imagery. We decided early on that we wanted to be very image heavy in the exhibit. So that meant a lot of hours scouring the internet and talking to institutions around the world for me. Physical interactives, analog interactives, and a lot of historic artifacts and artifact cases, and even tactile experiences, and also have something fun. So for instance, in the picture on the right, we repurposed a bunch of uniforms we had left over at the Citadel from the 1812 commemoration that were gathering dust in the quartermaster. So we just brought them out and made a dress-up station. It didn't cost us much, and it's a big hit. And it's not just with the kids. That people in there taking their Christmas card photos. But one of the big things we use quite a bit of, and Keith was talking a little bit about this with the beast, that anchor table in the first anchor table that we spent. I think we probably spent 2 years working on that thing. Yeah. People, whenever we were showing Parks Brass through the exhibit, they'd always ask, how much did this cost? And I always answer, emotionally or fiscally? Because that's, wow. But when we talk about the technology in the exhibit, we use, again, a wide variety depending on how people learn and how to catch people's interest. We have everything from slideshows, where we're just showing historic photos from the World Wars on a repeat pattern with some music playing in the background. We've got digital journals and touchscreen interactives like the Hometown Heroes display you see there, where we took the Hometown Heroes, which is a national initiative by Parks Canada, where every national historic site was presenting their own hometown heroes. We gathered them all and digitized them. And the idea is that this can be a prototype for something that we can send back out across the entire system. I mean, if you have a touchscreen, you can put these in every post office or every visitor center or every kiosk in Parks Canada site. So they're still working on them. The other thing, and I'm particularly proud of, you can't quite see it in photo on the right, is a 3D animated 5-minute 3D animated fly through of the evolution of Halifax built form, where we start and we show how the city changed over each era. I'm a former computer animator, so I drove the developers nuts on this one, and they were mad at me by the end. And the last one is the story stations. Now, story stations, we have 5 of these throughout the exhibit. I have 3 cameras on, and we did is hired actors to project actual historic leaders or actual people from the eras. And wherever possible, we use those people's words as the script. So we are actually hearing the people as they spoke and what they spoke. And in this case, a couple of things that provided for us. Provided us with a chance to include more diversity. I mean, we tried to make sure that there was a good mix in every story station. So we're not just telling one story. We're not just telling the colonial story. It provides empathy for the visitor, that they can actually feel some of the emotion that people at the time would have felt. They can internalize what's going on a little better. The other thing, project management standpoint, for audio visual, this is your best bang for your buck. They don't take up a lot of space and they don't cost a huge amount of money and they have a huge impact. And if I can do this, nope, sorry. I can't make it play. Want to try?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Oh. It's all yours. On the note.
So the screen in the middle is one of the story stations that Mike is referencing there.
Got the next slide.
Oh, you got the next one?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
That's a mispress. So when all was said and done, and all 5 years lapsed, we finally had what's been decided as a world-class exhibit, not by me, but there's a lot to it. And this gives you an idea of what we've created. Now, I was looking at slides morning and going over, I realized I can't say enough about all the help we received. You can't do something like this in a void. You can't do this in a vacuum. We received assistance from organization, institutions, and individuals from across the region, across town, from across the world, and even in one case from across the way. The laundry list of organizations that helped us: Nova Scotia Archives, Nova Scotia Museum, Library Archives Canada, British Museum, British Library, individual donors. And the one that really stands out and I really want to acknowledge here is the work that we got from the Army Museum at the Halifax Citadel. They were outstanding and generous in offering their expertise, their knowledge, their artifacts. We have a lot of their artifacts in our exhibit. And just that to create something like this, you need help. And that's one of the lessons we learned, is that don't be afraid to ask people for help, because they're more than willing to give it. Oh, it's yours.
All right. Awesome. Wrapping, I have a few final thoughts. We've really been trying to emphasize the journey tonight, process, and the teamwork, and the partnerships, as Mike mentioned, the collaborations that went into this project. They're extensive, a behind the scenes look, if you will. The lessons we learned on this journey are many. Sharing authority is hard. Building trust is harder. Sometimes the barriers are internal in terms of breaking free from your own policy documents or management plans or the way you used to do things. We heard this all the time, often from our partners, that somehow we were restricted at our own sites in the stories we could tell because they weren't part of the key messages or the original reasons for designation of a site in the site's commemorative integrity statement, one of those policy documents. Nonsense. It doesn't say anything of the sort. There's no mention of the 78 Highlanders, the Citadel's commemorative integrity statement. And the 78th Highlanders, as I think most people here in the room would know, have been the backbone of the Citadel's Living History program going back decades. So, in storytelling, we went broad and we went bold and we encourage others to do so. At the end of the day, however, this is still just an exhibit. Parks Canada's relationship with the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia and the other communities I've mentioned here tonight is far more important. And I can say that this relationship was strengthened because of the trust built in the process of this project. And I've seen that in a number of tangible ways, just with the relationship with the Mi'kmaq, partnerships since then, telling the stories of Mi'kmaq veterans in the World Wars collaboratively, commemorating a former residential school, Shubinati, as a National Historic Site a couple of years ago, developing a new collaborative archaeology program with the nation and a youth camp at Kejimkujik, and supporting the repatriation of Mi'kmaq artifacts to the Mi'kmaq Nation, including from Parks Canada and the Government of Canada. I could go on and on. Final thought. Finally, we're still tinkering. The exhibit opened in 2022, so a couple of years ago, but for us, it's still very much a living thing that can be improved and perhaps should be and revised over time. One example of this, as you can see here on your screen, is a new story station featuring 3 tragic Nova Scotians from the World Wars. They all paid the ultimate sacrifice. George Price, the famous figure, the last to die, 1918. Minnie Follett, a nurse, went down on a hospital ship that was hit by a German U-boat. And we also feature the Mi'kmaq soldier, Charles Doucette, who was the victim of a war crime at the hands of the Nazis shortly after the D-Day landing in Normandy in 1944. In helping tell this story, we had a great little partnership with the Johnson family from Eskasoni, Cape Breton. And you can see Tom Johnson Jr. here, dressed up as Charles Doucette and playing his role shortly before he died. Charles Doucette, that is. And this is kind of what Mike was referencing. It just gives, for a very small footprint on the wall, these little features, these story stations gave a multitude of perspectives, all about the same historical period from a range of perspectives. So I had mentioned that we had the luxury of space. We had a big space. So, lots of places aren't as fortunate. They have lots of complicated history. Perhaps there's all kinds of competing languages that they have to use. So these little elements allowed us to get at a diversity and a different range of perspectives in a very small package.
So we subtitled the exhibit "A City Shaped by Conflict." Shouldn't we talk about Halifax? And we demonstrate through the exhibits this conflict in one form or another, military, obviously, but also cultural, personal. All these conflicts shape the city, and we're seeing that even today. We're welcoming refugees from fleeing conflict from around the world, while we're still trying to reconcile animosities that go back 200 years here in our own province. And I guess that brings up the phrase that kept coming up a lot when I was working on this exhibit. Again, I'm not a professional historian, I'm a project manager. I just have a very weird skill set, which made me perfect for this. And when shared history was a new term for me when I came on board. And it really hit me when we were going through it that I studied, my undergrad was military history. I studied under Jim Stokesbury at Acadia, if any of you remember Jim. I had been studying history almost all my life, and working on this exhibit, I saw other perspectives. I saw how the same events were impacted by and it's their impact on different people and different cultures, well, different from me. And I guess that's where it hit me that when that term shared history, and I have to say that this is work on this things that had a mass impact on me. It changed the way I viewed history, and I still do. And I guess for me, my big hope is that when someone comes through this exhibit, a little bit of that rubs off on them too, at that impact. That, as I joke, there's something in there for everyone to hate. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. On behalf of Keith and I, we're very grateful to see such a great audience and hopefully a bunch on Zoom. With that, we'll open up to questions.